holds. Now, universal credit, it's a single payment made to welfare claimants that rolls together 6 existing benefits and meant to encourage people to make work pay. But have the cuts to this flagship welfare scheme reduced the work incentives it's supposed to bring and hit the incomes of the least well-off? Some of the government's own MPs think so, as Mark Lavelle reports. They want the cuts reversed.
Theresa May says she wants a country that works for everyone, that's on the side of ordinary working people.
It means never writing off people who can work and consigning them to a life on benefits, but giving them the chance to go out and earn a living and to enjoy the dignity that comes from a job well done.
But now some in her party are worried that low earners will be hit by changes to universal credit, a benefit system originally set up to encourage more people into work.
We also need to focus tax credits and universal credit on those on lower incomes.
Concern is centred on the government's decision in the July 2015 budget to find £3 billion worth of savings from the Universal Credit Bill. Conservative MP Heidi Allen is working on a campaign to get MPs in her party to urge the Prime Minister to think again.
I want her to understand for herself what the outcomes might be if we press ahead with universal credit with these work allowances in it.
Do you think Theresa May right now understands what you understand?
To be fair, unless you really get into the detail, and I have through my work on the Work and Pension Select Committee, I don't think anybody does. And I suspect perhaps...
Including the Prime Minister?
Possibly, yes.
Independent economic analysts at the IFS agree with Heidi Allen that cuts to universal credit weaken incentives to work.
One of the key parts of the universal credit system is the work allowance. That's how much you can earn before your credit starts to be withdrawn. And as the government has sought to save money, both under the coalition and now the current Conservative government, that work allowance has been cut time and time again. And the biggest cuts happened in the summer budget in 2015. And that basically reduces the amount of earnings you get to keep when you move into work, and so weakens the incentive people have to move into work.
What do changes to the universal credit system mean? The Resolution Foundation think tank has crunched the numbers. And if you compare what would have happened before the July 2015 summer budget to what will happen by 2020, and even if you take into account gains in the national living wage and income tax cuts, recipients will be hit by annual deductions. Couples and parents would receive on average £1,000 less. A dual-earning couple with 2 children under 4, with one partner working full-time on £10.50 an hour, the other working part-time around 20 hours a week on the minimum wage, they would receive £1,800 less. But hit most by the changes would be a single parent with a child under 4 working full-time on the minimum wage. They would receive £3,600 less. So what do campaigners want to see?
I think, if I'm honest, it's unrealistic given the economic climate to expect everything to be reversed. I think that's too ambitious. What I would like to see is an increase in the work allowances to those people who will be hardest hit. That's single parents and second earners hoping to return to work, because they're the people we need to absolutely make sure stay in work.
The Sunday Politics understands that about 15 to 20 Conservative MPs are pushing for changes ahead of the autumn statement. A former cabinet minister told us that they believed further impact analysis should be done to find out if any mitigation measures are needed to help the worst off. And former Work and Pensions Secretary Ian Duncan-Smith, an architect of the system, now says the cuts should be reversed. But his former department has told us it has no plans to revisit the work allowance changes announced in the budget last year.
Well, I would say to Heidi Allen and IDS, they got it right the first time, and they should stick to the vote they cast last year, because these reforms actually do make sense. What interests me is the fact we're trying to move people off welfare into work. We're raising the wages people earn by massively increasing the minimum wage, and this is working already. People are coming off welfare and into work.
But campaigners are pushing for savings to come from other areas to relieve the pressure on universal credit.
Well, the other thing that we have to start looking at is the triple lock on pensions. Financially, I mean, it's been a great policy, and it was absolutely right that we lifted pensioners who were significantly behind for many, many years in terms of income levels. But they've overtaken and overshot now, and I think it's time for us to look at that policy again, because that is costing us an awful lot of money.
With just over 3 weeks to wait until the Conservative leadership's new economic plan is unveiled in the autumn statement, its top team is under pressure from within its own ranks to use it to ensure work really does pay.
And I'm joined now by the former Working Pension Secretary, the architect of Universal Credit, Ian Duncan-Smith. Welcome back to the programme. Theresa May said that she's on the side of the just managing, the working poor. But they're about to be hit from all sides, aren't they? Their modest living standards are going to be squeezed as inflation overtakes pay rises. There'll be further squeeze because in-work top-up benefits are frozen, and incentives to work are going to be reduced by the cuts in universal benefit. So much for being on the side of the just managing.
Well, Theresa is right, by the way, to focus on this particular group. And by that, the definition, I think, has to be the bottom 5 deciles. In other words, the bottom half, in economic terms, of the social structure. Well, there's an opportunity. This is the point I'm making. It's an opportunity now to put some of this right. One of the reasons I resigned in March was because I felt that the direction of travel we've been going in had been to take far too much money out of that group of people when there are other areas which actually, if you need to make some of those savings, you can. The key bit is that group needs to be helped through into work and encouraged to stay in work. And there was a report done with the IFS when we were there at Universal Credit, and it said if Universal Credit's rolled out along the lines it was meant to be before the cuts, people would be 13% more likely to go into work, stay in work longer, and earn more money. So this is a net positive, but that is called into question.
Well, let's unpick some of the detail, because they're very important. But before I do you accept the words of your former Cabinet colleague, David Willetts? He says, on the basis of the things I just read out to you, that the just managing face, quote, a significant and painful cut in real terms if we continue on the way we're going.
I do, in essence, because that's the reason why I resigned, because I felt that Heidi raised that issue as well, that we had got the balance wrong. I mean, for all the talk, absolutely right, to help pensioners get to a certain point where they were on a level par, doing that the right thing over 5 years. But staying with that process has cost us now £18 billion extra in this year in total, and will go on costing another $5 billion. And then there's the lifting of the tax allowances, which we'll probably come to.
Well, let's come on to some of that. But I want to begin by just reminding you and our viewers what David Cameron told the Conservative conference in 2009. Here it is.
If you're a single mother with 2 children earning £150 a week, the withdrawal of your benefits and the additional taxes you pay mean that for every extra pound you earn, you keep just 4 pence. What kind of incentive is that? 30 years ago, this party won an election fighting against 98% tax rates for the richest. I want us today to show even more anger about 96% tax rates for the very poorest people in our country.
So there we go, real anger, an effective rate of over 90%. Universal Credit reduces that, but some will still face, as they lose benefits and pay tax, a marginal rate of over 75%. That's still too high.
Yes, it's the collision between those going into work and then the moment they start paying tax. The withdrawal rate on Universal Credit is set at 65%, so you could call that the base marginal tax rate for most people in it.
1.2 million will face 75%.
Which is the whole point about why the allowances are so important. And the point about the allowances, which your viewers may not fully understand, is that the allowance was set as part of Universal Credit to allow you to get certain people with certain difficulties as they cross over into work to retain more of their benefit before it's tapered away as they go up the hours in work. And the reason for that is somebody like a lone parent who may be struggling with various issues around it, you want her to have a bigger incentive than necessarily, say, a single person who doesn't have the same commitments. So it's structured so that somebody with difficulties getting to work, like with disabilities, etc., all have slightly different rates. What's happened is that last year a decision was taken to reduce tax credits and then on the back of that to reduce those allowances. And I really do believe that given everything that's happening now, we need to restore that to the point where it actually helps those people cross over into work.
Well, you say a decision was taken. It was a decision by the former Chancellor, George Osborne, in the summer budget, and other decisions were taken in successive of his budgets to raid the universal credit budget, which has resulted in the disincentive being higher than many people wanted. Do you accept that has been the consequence of his decisions?
Look, I was in a government. We take collective responsibility. I argued that this was not the right way to go, but when you're in, you have to stay with it. You lose that argument. Actually, there was another attempt, by the way, before the spending review last year to actually reduce to increase the taper. So in other words, the marginal rate would have gone up. I managed to stop that. But the point I'm simply saying is, look, what we made as a decision maybe last year, given the circumstances and given the net effect of all of that, I think it is time for the government to then ask the question, look, if we're in this to help that group of people, universal credit is singly the most powerful tool. And one of the arguments I've made in the paper I published on Thursday that said, look, we are set to go on doing 2 more raising of the tax thresholds. In other words, taking more people out of tax. The problem is that is a diminishing effect on the bottom 5/10. Only 25 pence in every pound of that tax raise will actually help any of those.
Most of it goes to middle incomes.
And upper income. You and I will benefit from that far more than somebody in the bottom 5/10. Whereas with universal credit, every pound that you put into that will go to that bottom 5/10. That's why I designed it like that. You press the button and immediately you start to change the circumstances.
So should the cuts in universal credit that Mr. Osborne introduced against your argument, should they now be reversed?
I believe so. And I believe, by the way, you can do it even if there is a concern about spending, because I don't believe you need to go through with that continuing raise of the tax threshold. That alone costs, and of course this is dependent on inflation, but give or take £4 billion every time.
So it's in the Tory manifesto.
It's more than double. Well, what is in our manifesto, what is written through it, and the Prime Minister made this, the last Prime Minister made this clear in the conference, was that we want to improve the life chances of people. Absolutely was my strategy. Today's announcement, for example, on the Green Paper was what I wrote over the last 2.5 years, big changes necessary to the way we deal with the sickness benefit. That can now be done because of universal credit, because people can go back to work and they taper away their benefits. This is the most powerful tool to sort out people who live in poverty, universal credit. And we need to make sure it lands absolutely positively.
If Mr. Osborne's cuts were reversed, which is what you and some of your backbench Tory colleagues want to do, how would that improve the incentives of the working poor as they try to get on in life, but they have to pay a bit more tax, but they also lose a bit of benefit? How would it improve it? Would many still face a 75% marginal rate?
Well, the key question here is, first and foremost, as those people move through the income up to the point where they gain tax, that group will be enormously benefited by a re-emergence of these allowances at the right level. And that's what the IFS have said, and that's what I see the Resolution Foundation is saying, that's what the Centre for Social Justice, which I now chair, is actually saying, is that first and foremost, you have to get that group, because they're the group most likely to be drifting into poverty unless their incomes are right.
Would it help those who currently face a 75% marginal? Yes. You and I don't face a 75% marginal
we don't,
rate.
exactly right.
People a lot poorer than us do. What would it do to help them?
Well, I would love to get the marginal deduction rate down, the 65% down, lower, so that brings that down as well for those people. But of course, this is a balance about where you spend the money. My view is that I would prefer to do that rather than necessarily go ahead with these threshold raises anymore, because I think the combination of both the marginal deduction of 65%, getting it down to 60 or so, plus better allowances, will really, really allow universal credit to get to that group. It is going to be, and this is the report that was written by the IFS and ourselves showed that this is going to be the most dynamic and direct ability of a government to be able to influence the way that people improve their incomes in the bottom 5 deciles.
Would you take on an extra £100 of work if you knew you were going to lose £75 of it?
Well, absolutely. That's exactly the point that I've made.
Or even 65?
No,
it's
this
still
is my
a big
point.
Marginal rate.
This has been my argument all along. So universal credit can help that enormously. And just one small point, which goes missing sometimes. Over 70% of the bottom 5 deciles will be on universal credit. So whatever change you make to universal credit has a dramatic and immediate effect. So I am arguingly, genuinely, from the CSJ and with the others, it's time to rethink this. Prime Minister wants to make this a priority. I am completely with her on this. I think she's made a really good start. Now to deliver this, we need to
ensure that she's got a lot of work to do to deliver it. So let me finally put one idea. If, because it's a manifesto commitment, or because they don't want to do it, that stopping increasing the personal allowances is not acceptable, what about bringing to an end, by the end of this Parliament, the pensions triple lock that pensioners enjoy to improve and put more money to the working poor? What about that?
Well, you're absolutely right that there is now the danger, I think, of a misbalance between the generations. What has happened, quite rightly at the beginning, when we came in, we had a commitment as a Conservative Party in our manifesto to get pensions back onto earnings. That was absolutely right. With the coalition, that was moved to a triple lock, which guaranteed a minimum of 2.5%.
So what about ending that now?
Well,
I understand it's a promise through this Parliament after 2020.
Yeah, I am in favour now of getting this back to earnings again and allowing it to rise at a reasonable level. As I said before, moving from earnings to the triple lock has cumulatively cost £18 billion this year. Here was I, under pressure, as the government was scratching around trying to take more money out of working age areas, when in actual fact the budget was almost out of control on the pension side. Now, I'm in favour of helping pensioners, but I think now that they're up to a reasonable level, at a steady rate that can be afforded by government, that takes the pressure off working age people who have to pay for that.
So just to be clear, time in the years to come to end the triple lock and use the savings to help these people we've been talking about.
As part of a whole load of packages, yes, it is. I absolutely believe it. It will also help with the intergenerational fairness argument, which I feel is very strong.
Ian Duncan-Smith, thank you for being with us.